My name is Seph Duggan, and I'm a tour guide for Charleston Culinary Tours, a certified tour director, expedition leader, and independent contractor for Lindblad Expeditions and National Geographic, world traveler, and solo backpacker. It's my pleasure to be your virtual tour guide for the evening. This is Holy City Happy Hours, and it's hosted by Charleston Culinary Tour. So obviously our presentation for the night is cocktails, a look to our past, present, and future. For this introduction, I'm going to fit a lot of history into the next 20 minutes. My first topic, of course, is going to be the past. When I get into the past, we're going to talk about colonization and trade, post-war Enlightenment, and then making the turn. Now, for this portion of the presentation, I am going to very quickly summarize how alcohol came to North America and what we did with it once it got here. I don't want to get bogged down too much into the dates. There's a lot of history, and I'm here to talk about booze, not battles. So my intention is to set the stage as we discuss the technical aspects of cocktails during the present day. So I'm going to blaze through the past to get us to the present day to talk about the cocktail culture in present day North America. And then, of course, we're going to end it with the future. Where are we going to go from here? What is happening in the cocktail industry? And what is the future of that industry going to look like? So moving on. Now, of course, we're going to start with colonization and trade. Colonization and trade is incredibly important to the industry today. During the age of discovery, cultures clashed, collided, and exchanged. So this was very important for how alcohol moved into the Western Hemisphere and the New World. So if you go into any bar and restaurant, you can basically walk into a bar, pull a spirit off the shelf, and then trace its roots back to some sort of start. So this is how it pertains to the present day. And some of my favorite spirits is going to be Madeira. It's coming from Portugal. Punch bowls is a fun little adaptation we see here in Charleston, South Carolina with rum. This actually started during the Eastern trade with England and the East India Trading Company. They got the tradition in India, brought it to England, and then that migrated here. Rum, of course, the English colonized Barbados, which we'll talk a little bit more about in just a second. But rum is one of my favorite cocktails, or spirits, excuse me. Of course, bourbon is coming out of the US, that was created here in America. And then you have rice wines created in Southeast Asia, China, and then wine, you can literally find it all over the world. So colonization, trade, and the exchange of goods is very important when determining how alcohol came to the United States as a basis for cocktail culture. So in North America, of course, our central hub for commerce in the 17th and 18th centuries was the West Indies. So it was first discovered by the Portuguese. The Spanish stopped there very briefly, but never colonized. And England was the first colony to actually settle in the West Indies. And, the West Indies was a central hub for trade. Obviously, the Silk Road and the East Indies, trade routes were being troubled. So basically, Europeans had to find a way to move production and trade a little closer to home. And the West Indies was a great place for that. So the West Indies, now I just let you know that England was the first to colonize one of the islands in the West Indies. Barbados was colonized in 1625. Now I started our past in 1625 with Barbados and the West Indies because the most significant factor they're bringing to the table is their cash crops. Now England wasn't the only discovering nation to colonize the West Indies, but they definitely claimed their fair share throughout the Western Indies, Barbados, Antigua, Jamaica, and they all grew the same cash crops: tobacco, indigo, sugar. Sugar was the most important to present day cocktail culture because, of course, English trade being what it is, English trade and sugar is the precursor for the grandfather of cocktails in the United States. And of course, that is rum punch. So if you don't know about rum punch, we'll talk about that in just a second. Right now, I want to talk about colonial spirits in the age of discovery. So while all those beautiful countries, England, France, the Netherlands, while were they exploring, crossing the Atlantic, what were they actually drinking? So this is where I want to bring the talk to Charlestown, specifically the first voyage coming to Charlestown in 1670. Now, if you don't know, Charlestown was founded at a little place called Charlestown Landing. Our first settlers landed here in 1670, but first they had to stop off in Barbados. So they left England, traveled to Barbados, and when they did, they brought with them 15 tons of beer, 30 gallons of brandy, and of course they picked up a little bit of rum when they stopped off in Barbados, and that was only for about 6 travelers who were on the 3 ships coming over. Captain Joseph West, when he came in the 1670s, let me backtrack a little bit, he was the commander and governor on that first voyage in 1670. After they arrived in Charlestown Landing, he was actually quoted in a letter to England, one of our Lord Proprietors, stating that a few of the settlers were so addicted to rum that they would do very little whilst the bottle is at their nose. So that's just kind of letting you know, like, the conditions of the colony in the 1600s prior to the turn of the century. As we move into the 1700s in Charlestown, Charlestown was no stranger to strong drink, prostitution, bastardy, disorder, and public drunkenness. Tippling or punch houses could be found all along the waterfront. Sailors, settlers could enjoy various ales, ciders, madeiras, and rum. And then it was actually not unusual for one person to consume 15 to 16 pounds of alcohol in one bout. So I actually did the math and some of the conversions on 15 pounds of alcohol in one bout. 15 pounds weighed out is about 240 fluid ounces. So for one settler in Charlestown in the 1700s would consume anywhere, to put it in today's terms, 15 beers and 6 shots. So that's roughly 240 ounces. Obviously, you can spread out the beers and the shots however you want, but one person, 240 ounces, that's pretty significant consumption. And then other concoctions in colonial spirits in the age of discovery, cock or spruce ale. Cock ale is made from chicken stock. You can let the chicken stock ferment over time. The alcohol, of course, kills off any bacteria, hopefully. Spruce ale was made from spruce tips, so it's sort of like a pine ale. Rum punch is what Charleston is most known for. Rum punch is the grandfather of all cocktails. It was brought from India. The word punch is a derivative of a Hindi word panch, meaning 5, and that's going to come up later in the presentation. And of course, other concoctions that were coming out of this time were bourbon, which is the American spirit, and then spiced ciders. So moving along, we're going into post-war Enlightenment. Now, of course, when I'm talking about post-war Enlightenment, I am alluding to the Revolutionary War. And post-war Enlightenment covers a significant gap, about 135 years to be exact. And the reason for this is that the lack of standardization, which will develop as we move closer to the end of the 19th century, and most of what's happening throughout the United States during this gap is sort of a repeat of the cocktails from the beverages on the previous slide. So there's not really, I don't need to go into a deep analysis. The major difference during this time period is the availability of goods. With the Revolutionary War, obviously we're fighting a war with Britain, so trade routes didn't reopen until after the Revolutionary War had been won. So we were able to reopen closed trade routes, establish new trade routes, and then of course we can source locally using bourbon, our new favorite spirit. So the early efforts to modernize the bar, or early efforts to bring us to a modern bar today, it can be broken down as follows. So first, we're going to talk about the Archaic Age. The Archaic Age, just like I just mentioned in 1783 to 1830, not much had changed from colonial consumption. You're still going to be seeing a lot of Madeira, brandy, beer, ciders, and then some adaptations of them. Ciders have spices that you can add to it, cinnamon, orange, things like that. Punch bowls, generally made of rum punch, And I have on the slide a little, in parentheses, it says 4 groups. So in the archaic age, we don't see like the single served drink just yet. We still see punch bowls for large groups. There's no cordials or ice. Ice is going to be an incredible development to the modern bar. And then little to no bar tools. Alcohol is one of these crazy regional things where bartenders working in taverns, you know, if your competitor is across the street and he hasn't developed, you know, some bar tool to mix a cocktail with, you might not necessarily want to let him in on your secret. So there's no like written down techniques in the archaic age. It was, as it's defined, very, very archaic in the 1780s to 1830. The next stage I'd like to talk about is the Baroque age. This is from 1830 to 1835. Now, during the Baroque age, we actually have some pretty amazing developments that occur. And the first one I have listed here is ice. Ice is a crucial element when it gets into blending and mixing of cocktails. Ice, I mean, everyone's gone to a bar, you've seen it shaken up, you've seen it stirred up, you can crack it. You put it in a large cube if you're drinking a whiskey and bourbon. So ice was something that was necessary to development to a modern bar. Jerry Thomas in the 1862, he is the grandfather of modern day mixologists. Jerry Thomas actually wrote a book, and the book is what's shown right next to his picture there. It's How to Mix Drinks and the Bon Vivant's Guide. This publication was written in 1862. It was actually a revision. So Jerry Thomas had been working very, very hard just before the onslaught of the Civil War. So he was the first person to start standardizing cocktails and drinks. So in the book, How to Mix Drinks, he actually has over 600 cocktails in those drinks. If you want, you can purchase this book on Amazon. It's a pretty interesting little read. More developments in the Baroque age are going to be early modern tools. So now that we have some documentation, other people are starting to share some secrets. You're seeing more and more of the same tools throughout the colonies. Made to order means no longer mixing drinks in large punch bowls. Now, you know, patrons would prefer that the drinks were made individually and just for that person, which was a huge development. And then, of course, you know, now that we are recording all of our techniques, there's some sort of documentation. New techniques develop now. Mixologists don't have to start at square one. They can build off of what Jerry Thomas was already doing. So lots of developments in the Baroque age. And then the Classical age in 1885 is when like true cocktail culture really kicked off and got started. In the Classical age, now you have standardized practice. You have more and more of those recipes being recorded. Sophisticated tools, you know, now you're seeing like shakers, mixing jars, you have stir sticks, so you don't have to just shake the ice, you can now stir the ice. And then glassware is going to be the most the most like influential development of the Classical age. In the Classical age, now using glass, you'll see a wide diversity of glasses. So meaning now drinks can have a more technical nature to them. You don't just have to use the same glass for different styles of drinks. And when we get into our present day technical analysis, you'll see why glassware is important. And then, of course, Classical age, new spirits. With new trade in the 1900s, transportation, it's easier and easier to cross the Atlantic, get goods across. You're seeing more and more spirits. People at this time are becoming more and more traveled. So you're going to see newer spirits that are introduced in the Classical age. Now, it's unfortunate, I do have to let everyone know, 1920 is where classic mixology ends. I'm a little hesitant to say this because there's a lot of history to be covered at the turn of the century, but after 1920, something completely different takes over and takes hold. So, of course, starting in 1920, from 1933, you have Prohibition. And I love the picture that I chose here. It says, "Prohibition is near, at hand, prepare for the worst, stock up now." So obviously you have this massive boom in the classical age from like all these like new cocktails, you know, everyone's going out, it's the, you know, the start of the roaring 20s kind of thing. And then boom, temperance movement starts hitting, that's taken from you. And basically during Prohibition, like anything you can get your hands on is what you're going to be drinking. Anything you can get your hand on and store was the other part, because alcohol was going to be illegal for the next 13 years. One of the next things that happens after the turn of the century, World War II, 1939 to 1945. Obviously in 1939, Prohibition has just ended. However, coming out of a 13-year dry spell out of Prohibition, you know, most people were just used to drinking the hard stuff neat, and you'll see that trend continuing through 1945. Most of the men that went off into World War II, they were introduced to a new style. Europeans have a little bit of a different culture when it comes to cocktails. So with World War II, you don't see much significant change in the cocktail industry, but where we really get moving in the 20th century is with TV, pop culture, and what I call the convenience factor. I love Blue Hawaii. I picked Blue Hawaii and Cocktail in the movie Cocktails by Tom Cruise to represent TV, pop culture, and convenience. TV and pop culture, obviously in the 1950s is when like marketing really started to kick up. 1960s with Elvis and Blue Hawaii. That's when you start seeing all of those like new island, like sort of tiki drinks start entering the scene. And same thing with, like in the 1980s when cocktails came out. Convenience is going to be the most important factor from 1950 to present day. Obviously, microwaves were invented. They were start using sour mix instead of mixing ingredients like they were doing in the classical age. Now to make a margarita, they would just take tequila and whatever like margarita sour mix instead of actually making it by hand. So TV, pop culture, and convenience are actually the death of what we would call the craft culture movement in North America. So that brings us to today. There's so much history to blaze through, and I really struggled with that portion because there's so much more I want to tell you about our past. However, it's important to get into the technicality of the present day cocktail culture to help you understand why I said that I believe classic cocktail culture like really ended in 1920. So what we're gonna do, I'm gonna do like a little bit of analysis on the present day cocktail culture, but first I wanna define craft and cocktail. Craft is a word that we see more and more with microbreweries and craft beers. It's not really well defined, and one of the definitions I found that I like a lot, craft is real drinks made in a culinary style with real ingredients following original recipes. And if I don't go any further, that pretty much defines what I was saying previously. These are real drinks made in a culinary style, so real cocktails that have been like dug up from our past in a culinary style, meaning made to order. So the person comes up to the bar, you make that drink just for that person based off the conversation the mixologist and the patron had. And then of course, real ingredients following original recipes. So all of those classic cocktails from the classical era, that's going to be our base structure for the modern craft cocktail, but with real ingredients. And we'll dive in a little deeper on that in just a second. And that was Dale DeGroff, the founder of the Museum of the American Cocktail, quoted there. Now, what is a cocktail? Cocktail comes from an English etymology. Cocktails, it was the English tradition to dock the tail of mixed breed horses. So obviously, like the English revered purebreds, so they would leave the tail full and long. But when there was mixed blood, they would dock the tail. Obviously, these were working horses as well. When they docked the tail, they would call this a cock-tailed horse, meaning that its blood had been diluted down. And so when we say cocktail, we're alluding to this development. Cocktails, they use the same 5 base elements to which punch is defined. So punch bowls were sweet, sour, strong, soft, and spicy, but ultimately they would help form the same base to which many of our modern cocktails apply their structure. The punch bowls, like I mentioned earlier, punch derived from the Hindi word of five. The five main elements. The punch bowl is the grandfather of the modern day cocktail. You had to have the sweet, sour, strong, soft, and spice to make a well-balanced punch bowl. So what all our modern day mixologists, Jerry Thomas and all those guys, what they did, they just took that punch bowl, scaled it down a bit, and made a perfect draft little cocktail just for you. So now we're gonna play around, and this is pulling up now, this is a picture of a punch bowl. It's nice, like silver. This is where colonists would sit in their tippling houses or punch houses, ladle out punch for everybody, and then eventually the old fashioned. The old fashioned is one of the first true cocktails, and it's going to follow the same base structure as rum punch. But before we get into the structure, you got to understand the formula. So when I talk about the formula, bartenders, mixologists, how you taste. There are 5 tastes. So what we have pictured here is going to be a little jar of honey, and obviously honey is going to be sweet. So there's one taste. This is a radicchio. Radicchio is going to be bitter. They're pretty bitter. I'm not like a huge fan of them. Salt is going to be the 3rd taste. Sour, and then the lesser known umami. What is photoed there is Parmesan cheese. Parmesan cheese has the highest, one of the highest naturally occurring sources of umami in the taste spectrum. Soy sauce also has occurring umami. If you don't know what umami is, just think about savory. Umami and savory, they go hand in hand. So when you taste something and it hits you like right in the back of the taste spectrum, you say, wow, that's really savory. Because it has high umami factors in it. So combining all of these 5 elements into one glass to create a perfect balanced cocktail is going to be the recipe for success. But any talented barman or mixologist also know how to play around with this formula to excite your taste buds, to throw you off, to catch you off guard, whatever it may be. Now, further into understanding the formula, I like the old fashioned. The old fashioned is one of the first true cocktails, meaning that it was the first single served beverage to be developed off of the rum punch. So what I have here is a picture of the old fashioned and then a core recipe. So the core recipe is what we want to build off of. So if you want to make the perfect classic old fashioned, you're going to want to stay within this realm. So the core is going to be a spirit, which is the base of the cocktail. So the spirit you're going to want is going to be a whiskey, a bourbon, or a rye. Any 3 of those would be acceptable depending on your taste. Obviously, when it comes to the spirit, going into a cocktail, you want to find something more neutral. Other bourbons, some bourbons can be like more oaky or spicy. That's going to like throw off the balance. So for a like perfectly well balanced old fashioned, you're going to want to find something that has a pretty neutral base. All whiskeys, bourbons, and ryes will have a spectrum, so you want to find one right in the middle for a classic. Bitters. Bitters is our next ingredient. This is the seasoning. This is where you get really the flavors for a classic old-fashioned. You're going to turn to agnostra. Sugar is going to provide the balance. So where spirits provide the base, bitters are the seasoning, sugar is really what kind of like ties it all together. For a classic, it's going to be 1 sugar cube, and then water, or I like water and technique go hand in hand. The reason why ice is so important in the development of the modern day cocktail is ice, whether it's cracked, whole cube, stirred, shaken, however you play around with your ice application, it's going to implement some sort of water. Obviously, shaking is going to impart the most water into your cocktail. That's why for technique on a classic cocktail, it is recommended that you stir in a mixing glass and then pour over a fresh cube. Now, obviously you want to strain pour over a fresh cube, just in case there's any granules in your mixing glass that don't further water down the classic cocktail, that would throw off the density and the balance. So we're gonna take this core recipe and we're gonna expand upon it real quick. For the adaptation, I love the adaptation. It is actually one of the beverages on my shirt. It's a stinger. So I have in parentheses next to it, classic cocktail. A stinger, just like I defined earlier, is one of those real recipes that bartenders have taken the core of the old fashioned and they played around, they played around with the balance, they played around with the seasoning, they played around with the technique. So for the stinger, the base is going to be like a nice cognac. The seasoning, so replacing the bitters, is going to be cream to mint. And then the balance is still going to be, it's going to be sugar, but instead of doing a sugar cube like muddled in the glass, they've taken that sugar, you just let it dissolve into warm water until it's a nice thick simple syrup. This helps for the application. Obviously, when you mix cocktails, you're mixing them cold, so sugar doesn't blend well unless you change its structure a little bit. And then the technique for the stinger is going to shake, strain over crushed ice. Now I want to take that a little further, and with the old fashioned, you also get into the extended families, hot toddies, champagne cocktails, and Sazeracs. Now, all the spirits that I have listed here are classified as classic cocktails. And then in this modern area, they do qualify as craft classic cocktails, especially if you know a good place where your bartenders are making their own tincture, meaning making their own bitters, juicing everything, not using pre-made juices. So as long as you're using those classic recipes with real ingredients, we have a beautiful craft cocktail. Now I listed the extended family here just to show how much diversity is in each realm of cocktail. I want to analyze another classic cocktail for you that's really popular and it's also misunderstood. So the next cocktail I'm going to do this same little play is the daiquiri. So with a daiquiri, the spirit base is rum, obviously. Rum has the same qualities that bourbon, whiskey, or rye can have. You can have neutral rums and then rums that have more sugar if they use sugarcane or molasses, or if it came from Jamaica or Barbados or Antigua or a mix of both. All of these Caribbean islands use different distillation. They use different techniques. They use different ingredients in their mash before they distill their liquor. So rum can have a spectrum as well. But rum is the true core to the daiquiri. And then of course the seasoning, instead of bitters this time, it's going to be lime zest. And the lime zest, if you look at the picture, that's just the little zest on the top. When you zest a lime, you actually bring out a lot of its citric acid. Mixologists will see them just squeeze over the top to just deliver some of that oil that's in the skin of the lime into the cocktail. So when you bring the cocktail right up to your nose, you get that aroma, that lime right there, and smell has a lot to do with taste, surprisingly enough. So this is how those classical prohibition, pre-prohibition mixologists were starting to understand the intricacies of the ingredients that they were working with. So lime zest is going to be the seasoning in the daiquiri. Sugar for balance. Now, in a daiquiri, traditional classic daiquiris, you can use just lime juice, but if you think that's too sour, depending on the limes that you're using, what the season of the year is, you can add a little bit of sugar too to help balance out that sour. And then for the technique, you're going to implement a little bit of water into the daiquiri. That's actually what gives the daiquiri its lack of clarity, is when you shake it so you build it in a shaker, pour all of your ingredients with ice, shake it up really strong, and then you want to double strain it. So you'll put a strainer on the top of the mixing jar and then double strain and then strain it once again when you pour it into a chilled coupe. So if you didn't notice, I haven't talked about glassware yet, but going back and forth between the two slides, there's quite a difference and glass here, for these two cocktails. And this is the same style. This is a beautiful daiquiri glass that you would have seen at the turn of the century in the 1900s. This gave the mixologist a little more room to work. Obviously, different spirits have different qualities. Rum, if you're mixing it in a daiquiri, when you shake it up, it's not going to really disturb the esters too much. With an old fashioned, you wouldn't want to serve it like up in a coupe unless you were doing, a different cocktail altogether. The rocks glass works perfect for an old fashioned and a nice big cube, obviously to not dilute it down. But with the daiquiri, a nice chilled coupe, double strained, is just the classic way to go. So this gives you a little bit of like a variety, and it's great for the presentation as well. The daiquiri just looks great in that nice classic like goblet coupe. Now, one of my favorite adaptations of the daiquiri is going to be a pisco sour. Surprisingly enough, pisco sour is a classic cocktail that was created during the classical era. Surprisingly, this is a time where we were starting to see lots of like trade coming forth. Pisco is a Peruvian wine, grape liquor. So it was actually down in Peru, you take the grapes, you let them ferment, and then you actually still some of that fermented mash to get pisco. It's a great neutral spirit, works great in a daiquiri. The seasoning for the pisco sour is going to be lemon and lime. Lemon has a little bit more sweetness than the lime. We'll add a dash of bitters when we finish it off. Of course, it's going to be balanced with simple syrup. And then we added a new element here. It's just a slight adaptation. An egg white to a pisco sour gives it a little bit of structure and some nice froth on top. The technique for the pisco sour is going to be similar to the daiquiri, but you do want to dry shake all of the ingredients first in the shaker before you add your ice. This is just to let all those ingredients and the egg white combine together. And then again, just shake it add the ice, give it a quick shake, and then double strain in the coupe. And you're going to garnish with a little dash of bitters on top for your seasoning. So once again, these are all classic cocktails that came out of the classical era. In the extended family, you have mojitos. Mojitos are in the extended family, same family as the daiquiri. Caipirinhas is a Brazilian cocktail. The base spirit there is cachaça. It's a spirit made from sugarcane. Mai Tais falls into the daiquiri category, and Tom Collins falls in that same category as well. All classics. So continuation with our present day cocktail culture. Most mixologists today tend to look towards the past. We have great structure. There's great information, tons of history. And honestly, I didn't even begin to scratch the surface on the amount of adaptations that you can get just out of the old fashioned and and daiquiris. I didn't even get into martinis, sidecars, flips, any of these other like great cocktails out there. So if you really, really want to deep dive, there's tons and tons of information. So great bartenders today. My favorite craft cocktail bars are ones that take those old recipes and then they add a little bit of a little bit of style, a little bit of change. It's fun to go to a bar and see a bartender really putting in some hard work on the cocktail that you just ordered, whether it's adding in an egg white, shaking it up and giving it that good body, or cracking the ice and the ice is going everywhere. A cocktail surprisingly can be a very personal thing. If you build a relationship with a mixologist, they know what you like, they know what you don't like, you can start to experiment together and really expand your taste. So that brings us into the future of cocktail culture in the United States. And interestingly enough, the picture I have here is the Nitrotini from Grill 225. That's actually a cocktail you can purchase in the city of Charleston if everything opens back up. And the reason I picked this for the futuristic drinks, you don't just have to stay in that category of classic structure. Mixologists today add tons of other things to further improve the experience. My favorite addition is always going to be like bruleed rosemary, bruleed fruit that goes right on top. In old fashions, you can take a smoking gun, add smoke into the old fashioned, which gives it this is a whole nother feel. But if I had to say, personally, if I had to pick where I would like to see cocktail culture, I think the tiki revolution needs to make a comeback. And it has, surprisingly, in the 1960s, 1950s, when Elvis Presley was doing his Blue Hawaii thing, there was a love for the tiki drinks, and that is actually starting to resurge. We're seeing more and more tiki restaurants, tiki bars, rum's making a comeback, so I'm really hopeful for tiki drinks in the future. Well, that's going to conclude my presentation. Everyone, I certainly hope you enjoyed it. Thank you for joining me this week with Holy City Happy Hours. Be sure to tune in next week when we talk about bourbon, the true American spirit. And don't forget to like or subscribe right up here in the box. Thank you, everyone. We'll see you next week.